The prophet at this time would, in fact, be an old man. He would probably be around 90 years of age. And so this is late in Daniel's life and late in the visions that are we're seeing. But you'll recall that 536 is a very significant date because that was at the end of the 70 years that we talked about in Daniel chapter 9. So they went into Babylonian captivity in 606 BC. Jeremiah 25, verse 11, predicted that they would be in Babylonian captivity for 70 years. Well, Daniel had been counting the days, and his prayer in chapter 9 was that God would fulfill his promise through Jeremiah. It's been 70 years and allow the people to return. All right. The people did, in fact, return. We know that through the leadership of basically two men by the names of Zerubbabel and Joshua, who was the high priest. And when they made it to Jerusalem, they immediately began construction on the city walls, and they, a few months after arriving in Jerusalem, were able to have worship there in Jerusalem for the very first time in 70 years. They had cleared the temple area. They had resumed sacrifices by the fall. And by the following spring, they had laid the foundation of the temple. But then the work stopped. It stopped for a number of different reasons that we can read about in the books of Ezra. And it stopped for 18 years. And so obviously that was a big deal. It wasn't like there was a couple of week cessation of the construction going on. I mean, it just completely stopped for 18 years. And it was not until God sent our Old Testament prophet Haggai to basically shame the people, because according to Haggai, they had devoted all of their time and attention to building their own personal residences while the house of God remained desolate. And so Haggai is shaming them because it's really a book about priorities. They were not making God's house a priority. So it may be that part of the vision and the discussion that we're going to see here in chapter 10 is related to what is going on in Jerusalem. And it may be that we're seeing some of the battles going on in the spiritual realm that are then manifesting itself in what is happening in the physical realm with humans. Now, that's quite a leap, and I understand that, but we'll talk some more about that in just a little bit. Chapter 10 is the beginning of a 3-chapter corpus. That chapter 10 is basically the preface. Chapter 11 is the lengthy vision that Daniel sees. And then chapter 12 serves as the postscript to this vision and some personal notes about Daniel and Daniel's life. It's interesting that there are going to be 2 great wars described. And those 2 great wars coincide with one another. And when DeAndre, am I breaking up?
You're good now.
Okay. I just got a warning that my audio was unstable. So um,
Hey, Denny, before you go forward, can you repeat something for me? You said something about there was something happening in the spiritual, on the spiritual side of things. I didn't fully catch that.
yeah, it seems that and Daniel 10 is the only chapter in the Bible where we learn this. We learn more about angels and the activity of angels from Daniel chapter 10 than almost anywhere else in the whole Bible. So this is really a fascinating chapter to look at when we think about what exactly the angels do, both the angels of Satan and the angels of God. Now we know that these angelic forces, both good and evil, are uh, trying to win over the hearts of men. And it seems like that when the evil forces are winning, that is also reflective on what is happening on earth. And when God's people are winning, then the good angelic forces are winning in heaven. Now, if that sort of blows your mind, join the club because it does mine too. It is something that we just don't have that much information about, but we're learning about these huge battles that are taking place in the heavenly realm that then have a reflection upon what is going on in the earthly realm. Anyway, this is what we're going to learn more about as we study chapter 10. All right, so let's get into the text here. Daniel 10, verse 1. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, again, that would be about 535, 534, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar, and the message was true and one of great conflict. But he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. All right, so God, as he has consistently done in the book, is blessing Daniel with information on what's going to take place hundreds of years later. He says, in those days, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. The text doesn't tell us why he was mourning for 3 weeks, but my guess is that Daniel has gotten word of what's going on in Jerusalem. The exiles have made it back, but the work on the house of God has stopped. And Daniel is very troubled about that. It could be that Daniel is still struggling with the last part of the vision that we saw in chapter 9, which was the prophecy of the 70 weeks and that the Messiah was going to be cut off. It might be that is what is upsetting Daniel. He says, I did not eat any tasty food. Now, I can totally relate to that statement whenever I fast, or not fast, but whenever I diet. I do not eat any tasty food. Are you that way when you diet? Are you thinking, man, when am I going to be able to eat something that I actually like? But anyway, he's not dieting. He's just upset and mourning. He said, nor did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed. And on the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the river, by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz. All right, this particular heavenly figure is one of the very interesting studies in the book of Daniel. Now, notice how the text describes him. He's dressed in linen. His waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Upes. His body was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze. And the sound of his words was like the sound of a tumult. Now, if you're familiar with the description of Jesus in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 13, the terminology is the same. And it is so similar that it's very difficult to not think that this heavenly figure, and he says there was a certain man, verse 5, is Jesus. And well, it is also possible in another interpretation that this was an angel. And you might ask, well, why would anybody think it's an angel when the terminology is so very much like what we read about in the Revelation? And the answer to that is found in just a few verses, where this man who looks like this needed the help of the archangel to get him out of a bind that he was in fighting for 21 days. And so the theory is that if this were in fact Jesus in the Old Testament, he's not going to need anybody's help. He's not going to need Michael's help or any other angel. But that is not necessarily true. There's terminology that is found in other places, like Isaiah 63 and verse 5, where God there says that he needed help. This is what is known as anthropomorphic language, where the way things are with men is described in the way it is with God, so that we would understand. And so I lean toward the interpretation that this is in fact Jesus. The link to Revelation 1 to me is just so strong that I can excuse the fact that he needed help from Michael later on as an anthropomorphic phrase, when everything else, if it wasn't for that, I think 100% of commentators would easily say that this is in fact Jesus. But anyway, we've got some good brethren that think it is an angel. Perhaps it's Gabriel, although if it is an angel, it doesn't say who it is. We just don't know. So those who opt for this being an angel also opt for it being Gabriel. Anyway, it says, verse 7, now I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, while the men who were with me did not see the vision. All right, so this is exclusive to Daniel. The other men that are with him know something's going on. And look at the last part of verse 7. Nevertheless, a great dread fell upon them, and they ran away to hide themselves. So they knew something big was going on. They're not seeing the vision, but they have a sense that a major event is taking place here. Verse 8, so I was left alone and saw this great vision, yet no strength was left in me, for my natural color turned to a deathly pallor, and I retained no strength. it's hard for us to completely understand what an exhausting, strength sapping experience these visions are. We only know it from the way it's described in the book of Daniel. Um, but what he is seeing and this heavenly figure that he is seeing are so powerful that Daniel's strength fled away and he falls into this deep sleep. Verse 9, but I heard the sound of his words. And as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face with my face to the ground. So it sounds like when this heavenly figure that I think is Jesus talked, Daniel just basically fell flat on his face. Verse 10, then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. So this powerful image is going to kind of revive Daniel, get him back up, not on his feet, but on his hands and knees. And because he's got more that he needs to be told. And he said to me, "O Daniel, man of high esteem." This is the same way Daniel has been described back in chapter 9 and verse 33. And he's going to be described that way again in verse 19 of chapter 10. Daniel was just really first rate. When we talk about the great men of the Old Testament, we'll throw in the names of Abraham and Moses and men like that. But Daniel belongs in that group. As a matter of fact, when in the book of Ezekiel, they're talking about the greatest men of God that were able to help other people, Daniel, along with Job, is named in, I think it's Ezekiel 14, verse 11. You might have to check me on that. But anyway, Daniel was named in the book of Ezekiel as one of the great righteous men of God. Already says, understand the words that I'm about to tell you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. All right, so God is ready from the very first day to give this information to Daniel, but Daniel wasn't quite ready to receive it yet, but God was ready. But there's more to that. And now we get into some of the head scratching, but really fascinating text here in Daniel 10. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. All right, we're talking about this 3-week period of time. We saw 3 weeks mentioned in verse 2, that Daniel was mourning for 3 entire weeks. He started praying, and this being that we're talking about was ready to come and answer Daniel's prayer on day 1. But as we said, Daniel wasn't quite ready to hear, but also there was this heavenly battle that was going on, and you've got the prince of the kingdom of Persia. Well, the prince of the kingdom of Persia is not a man. He is an angelic figure. This same terminology of prince is going to be used later on to describe Michael. If you drop down to verse 21, however, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth, Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. All right, so we know Michael as an archangel. We don't know him as a prince, but also the uh, the angels of Satan are here being described as a prince of the kingdom of Persia. All right, let's kind of break that down a little bit. Is this verse telling us that every nation has an assigned prince or angelic being, and both good and bad? And this prince, who is the prince of Persia, was withstanding the messenger of God, so that for 21 days he's trying to get to Daniel, but he can't get to Daniel until, as we read on in verse 13, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. All right. So this gives us a remarkable glimpse into the battles that are being waged in heaven. And this section, as I mentioned before, is unique in all of the Bible. But remember, passages like Hebrews 1 and verse 14 that talks about how angels are ministering spirits sent to give help to those who are going to inherit salvation. So what do the good angels do? Well, they help God's people. Now, if you're like me, you would like to know more about exactly what that means. What kind of help do they give? Well, the Bible doesn't answer that question. We also have passages like Ephesians 6:10 and following, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Well, our strength that the Lord gives us could in fact be that which is derived from these heavenly beings. And then Jesus talks briefly about angels in Matthew 18 and verse 10. Uh, that's a passage that people use in order to justify the doctrine of guardian angels, that everybody has their own guardian angel. Or some look at that passage and they subscribe to the doctrine that children have guardian angels. But the Bible nowhere teaches that these angels are assigned as guardians of us or guardians of children. Besides, if you subscribe to the doctrine of guardian angels for children, then what happens when a child dies? It really throws your theology out of whack. Well, why didn't my son or my daughter's guardian angel protect him or her? Well, we don't need to go there because the Bible doesn't go there. The Bible doesn't teach that we have our own personal guardian angel assigned to us, protecting us. But what the Bible does teach us is that the angels are the ministering spirits, Hebrews 1:14 says, and they are working with those who are going to inherit salvation. Now, without running down that rabbit trail too far, Satan could, in fact, overpower us because we're of flesh and he is of spirit. And so if God did not limit his power, then Satan could easily overpower us. And so when you've got passages like in the book of Job, where God is continually setting limits to exactly what Satan can do to Job, or in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but will, with the temptation, provide a way of escape. That's 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. So the Bible tells us that we could be overwhelmed. Satan could overwhelm us, but God is limiting what Satan is doing. Now, here's where I'm going with this. Is it possible then that it is the good angels that are assigned to limit the power of the bad angels? And those bad angels are those who work with kings and kingdoms to make life harder on God's people. Now, we know that in the book of Revelation, when Satan is bound, according to Revelation 20 in verse 1, he is no longer going to be able, listen, to deceive the nations. What Satan was able to do with Rome and with other nations, where he completely controls those nations and those kings, making life so hard for the people of God. Well, Satan is no longer going to be able to do that. He's been bound, according to that passage in Revelation 20 and verse 1. All right, so what we're seeing is that you've got the forces of good fighting against the forces of bad. And when the forces of bad or evil win, then that's when life becomes even more difficult for the people of God. Now, you might say that almost sounds like it takes away our free will. Well, actually, if you understand what I'm saying, it's the opposite of that, because we are the ones that are determining the direction that things go. And you might say, in a sense, we're controlling what is happening in these heavenly battles. If we are succeeding in righteousness, then the wicked forces in the heavenly places are being defeated. But if we are succumbing to temptation, then that means the evil forces are winning, because God is not going to send his angels and make you be righteous or make me obey him. That's not how God works. And so our choices are ultimately what determines our own destiny, but also determines whether the good angels are winning or losing in the heavenly places. That's why, getting back to Ephesians 6 and verse 11 and 12, Paul says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the evil powers of darkness in the heavenly places. We're not fighting against men. We're fighting against the spiritual forces of darkness. Those are the spiritual forces of Satan. And so they're trying to get to us. They're trying to win us to their side, to be a worshiper of Satan. But God is sending his good angels to limit what they can do, where they're not going to be able to overpower us. So you may have some questions about that after the end of class. Today, we'll try to reserve some time for some questions. And I, like I said, it's fascinating stuff. And I'm constantly looking at this text saying, God, could you have given us a little bit more? But it wasn't God's plan to do that. So what we have is what God wanted us to have. Now, we should understand this prince that's being described is a powerful spirit, but he is an evil spirit that was able to keep one of God's angels under wraps for a period of time to keep him from getting to Daniel. But because of the intervention of Michael, who is called one of the chief princes, he is stronger than whatever force was holding back this heavenly being. Now, again, don't say, well, there's no way that could be Jesus. I understand this could be a part of God's plan. Did God not allow men to do what they willed to Jesus when he was in the flesh? Well, of course he did. So it's not that far of a stretch to suppose that the same could have happened in Daniel chapter 10. But anyway, maybe I'm spending too much time on that. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Now, Michael is described as one of the chief princes. According to Jewish uh, beliefs, there were four archangels, of which Michael was one, and they have names for the other archangels. Gabriel, who is another of the named angels, is never called an archangel. You might say, I guess I don't understand what that really means. It means that the angelic force were broken down into ranks, and that Michael, who it says is one of the chief princes. So we know there are other chief princes that are of the same power and authority as is Michael. He's in the top tier of powerful angels. Now, there are some that believe, and I happen to be one of them, that Satan was originally one of the chief princes. He was an archangel, but he turned against God, rebelled against him, and abandoned his heavenly abode, and now serves as the great tempter, the great deceiver, but a very powerful one for sure. But nevertheless, Michael is stronger than this evil force that the heavenly being is dealing with. So now it's been 3 weeks. Michael enabled him to leave. So the satanic angels did not want this heavenly being to make it to Daniel because the message that is going to be given to Daniel is a message of victory, is a message of God's people winning. And Satan doesn't want that message to be advertised. All right. So the text says that Michael, one of the chief princes, came here to help me. And then he's going to say regarding Michael in verse 21, he stands firmly with me against these forces. So this is not much information, but this is what we have as far as Michael is concerned. All right, so let's look at what we've talked about so far. We had the prelude, the introduction of the vision that is described even a great warfare. All right, a great conflict, verse 1. Well, it's a conflict that has taken place in heaven, and then we'll see in chapter 11, and on earth. And then in verses 4 through 9, the pre-incarnation, the identity of the man in linen, which I'm of the view that we're talking about Jesus in the Old Testament. And then in verses 10 through 14, a pronouncement is given, an instruction for Daniel to understand the words that are being given. let's go back to Michael just briefly. His name means who is like God. And we see Michael in Jude 9. We also see Michael in Revelation 12 directly fighting against Satan and winning. And Satan is being cast out in Revelation 12. All right, now we're ready to look at the last section of chapter 10, uh, the intervention of strength for Daniel. All right, let's back up though and talk about verse 14. Now I've come to give you understanding of what will happen to your people. Notice carefully the language, to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. Now, if you've been following me as we've gone through this book, you know that I have hit strongly on the point that the latter day terminology in the book of Daniel is not talking about the end of time, but is talking about the end of the Jewish age that ended in AD 70 when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. So now this text says what is going to happen to your people in the latter days. All right, so we are talking about the end of what's going to happen to the Jews. But he says the vision pertains to the future. And we're going to see that terminology two more times, one in chapter 12, once in 12:9 and in chapter 12 and verse 12. Verse 15, and when he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. What was Daniel to say? He's overwhelmed by the awesome messenger. He's overwhelmed by what it is that the messenger is saying. He is about to be told about a great conflict that is going to take place. And it's wiping Daniel out, basically. Verse 16, and behold, one who resembled a human being was touching my lips. That reminds us of the cherub that touches Isaiah's lips in Isaiah 6 in verse 7. And then I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who was standing before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. Now, to me, it seems like Daniel sees this being as more than an angelic being. He's given him a higher level of respect. So one more little piece of evidence, if that is evidence in your mind, that this figure that we're talking about is Jesus, not an angel. He says, for how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? As for me, there remains just now no strength in me, nor has any breath been left in me. You see, it's not just the vision that is an exhausting experience. It's what Daniel is seeing in the vision. And what he's seeing in the vision is not good as far as his people. In Daniel chapter 9, he prayed that they would return to Jerusalem and had hopes that once they returned, the former glory would return to the Jews, and the city of Jerusalem would become that crown jewel city once again. But that's not what's happening. Daniel is seeing visions of this man that we talked about, Antiochus Epiphanes, and how he desecrates the temple, sacrifices a pig on the altar, and how it's just problem after problem after problem for God's people. Well, that's the vision that is so exhausting to Daniel. Verse 18. Then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. And he said, O man of high esteem, do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous. Daniel needs to pretty much toughen up, man up, and understand that he's got to prepare himself for the news, whatever that news is, whether it's good news or bad news. It says, now, as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, my Lord, speak, for you have strengthened me. Verse 20, then he said to me, do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia, for I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. So he's fighting against the prince of Persia, but he knows another prince, again, we're talking about an evil angelic being, is about to come on the scene. Now, does that mean then that when the evil angel, that is the prince of Persia, is defeated, that allows another evil angel to then come into place, and now he is the prince over the next kingdom to come, and that is Greece. Now, remember, he says that this is about to come. The Persian Empire just got started. When we began chapter 10, we're only in 535 or 534. The Medo-Persian Empire has only been in existence for a couple of years, and they were the world power for 200 years. Alexander the Great did not conquer the world until the 300s. So when he says that something is about to come, it is still a prophecy that is a couple of hundred years to be fulfilled. So after the ungodly forces of Persia are defeated, then there's going to arise another kingdom with its demonic supporters. And it lets us know that there's continual conflict going on in the spiritual realm. So he is going to return to contend with the demonic power that is behind the Persian Empire. So despite the fact that Persia is under God's hand and in at least some ways is serving God's purpose, it still has, because they're the ones that allowed God's people to return to Jerusalem, is what I mean by that. They are still dealing with demonic powers that are behind the kings, the rulers of that Persian Empire. He says, verse 21, however, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Well, this writing of truth is going to be a document that records what is going to happen, and it is going to affirm once again that everything that does happen is under God's control. He knows all things. He knows what's going to happen. He knows the difficulties that God's people are going to face, and that needs to be an assurance to Daniel that God is in control. He knows what's going to happen. He says, and it's a kind of a parenthetical statement, yet there is one who stands firmly with me against these forces. There is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. All right, so in the battle against these evil forces, God has, and we don't know the reasons for this, designated one person to fight against the evil forces, uh, demonic forces of the Persian Empire. But then Michael is coming and he says, I do have help. And he's got help from one of the most powerful angels, an archangel, Michael, that there is. All right, so let's take a little bit of an excursion, kind of a wrap up, because we've talked about some of these points. But Daniel 10, as I mentioned before, gives us such an amazing glimpse into some of the angelic work. First, they keep the ruling powers from becoming too evil. With the power of Satan, they could completely overwhelm and easily conquer everybody and everything. But because God dispatches these good angels, they are the ones that limit the level of power and the extent of which that power is going to be exercised. Now, are you thinking, I sure would like to know more about how that works? Well, so would I. But that's all we get from this text. Second, they do not allow satanic forces to overpower us. We saw that in the book of Job, how Satan was limited. But we also made reference already to 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, that no temptation is going to be able to overtake us. God always is going to provide a way of escape. That means that if we ever yield to temptation, it's totally on us. God had given us an out. We didn't have to yield to that temptation. Those of you that are older remember the comedian Flip Wilson, who had his comedy routine, "The devil made me do it." Well, the devil doesn't make you do anything. According to James 1, it's our own lust that is the problem. A third bullet point about angels is they perform God's providential bidding. Now, God, who is all powerful, doesn't need angels to do this. But this is a part of the way God has set up both the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. And you've got these angels that are performing God's bidding. Now, they also have free will. They could choose to not obey God. That's apparently what Satan did. That's what 2 Peter chapter 2 and the first chapter of the book of Jude are both describing about these angels that did not keep their proper abode. But that's what angels do today. And I know that there are people that say, is it possible that I've ever personally encountered an angel? Well, yes, I suppose it is. I've got people I know that are saying that I think this person that helped me or did this for me was actually an angel. Well, we'll never know for certain this side of eternity, but they do God's providential bidding. All right. I was thinking I had one more point on that, but that's it. All right. Notice that as we go into chapter 11, really, it's a part of chapter 10 I don't necessarily have a problem with the chapter break, but we're still talking about Persia and then Greece and then later on the kingdom of Rome. Chapter 11 is considered to be one of the most amazing prophetic chapters in all of Scripture. It is so incredibly detailed. And so we asked the question before we actually get into the, hey, oh, so I've been talking to myself and uh, maybe Penny. I don't know if Penny is hearing me, but oh, it did. Oh yeah, we'll just pick up with chapter 11 next week. All right, you betcha. Talk to you later. Bye.
Hey, brother Denny.
Hey,
This is Ron Rigney.
hey, Ron.
I've heard everything if you've said, and I've taken over 3 pages worth of notes. So,
Oh, well, good. Well, so are you? You're not Penny's iPhone. You're just iPhone.
yes. I'm
Okay.
not at the building. I have my just doing it on the virtual, the Zoom meeting. So
Okay.
I didn't hear what DeAndre said, but I heard what you said about you've been talking to yourself. I wanted to let you know that, well, there's one person that has been listening to you, and it's been outstanding.
Very good. Well, he said that the equipment there at the building overheated and this shut down. And so I got the impression that was able to at least finish chapter 10 that they were hearing and all that. But anyway, so anyway, I'm glad that you were able to get something. And I don't know who the Daninator is. Who's the Dan? Are you there? Can you hear me? And just shut down.
I'm Monica.
Monica,
I heard
how
you.
are
I heard everything you said too.
Oh, good. Okay.
I
Well,
wasn't feeling well tonight, so I've watched on YouTube. I don't want to cough. I do have a question though, if you have a second.
sure.
So, do you think the princes and the powers and like being over Persia? Do you think that's still part of today, like with Syria and
I
just
do.
looking at some of the African?
I do. And I don't have any reason to think that this no longer happens this way. Now, I did make reference to Revelation 20, where Satan is not going to be able to control a nation to the degree that he controlled Rome. But that doesn't mean that there are not demonic forces that still work with the various nations. And you named some good ones: Iran, Iraq, Syria. You could say Russia, maybe China. They just really are constantly fighting against God, fighting against Christianity. And well, why does that continue to be the case? Well, it could be because they've got demonic forces that are behind them. Does that make sense? Are you there? You're on mute if you're talking.
Oh, do you hear me?
No, I can now. Yeah.
Well, I had watched the Wonder Woman movie, had portrayed Ares, god of war. He came in and he had his clipboard and he was just walking around like a guy in charge, and nobody knew he was the god. He was just somebody dictating commands. And I'd always thought maybe that could be a possibility of how Satan worked, that he could be a real person in a real scenario and we wouldn't know any different.
Yeah, because we know that the good angels appear to mankind as men. And so there's no reason to not think that the demonic forces wouldn't do the same. As a matter of fact, Paul in 2 Corinthians 11 talks about how Satan and his workers disguise themselves as apostles, as angels of light, he calls them, where they're teaching the truth, but they're appearing as men. So that's certainly possible.
So he can only be one person at a time, though, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true.
A lot to wrap your mind around.
Isn't it though? It is mind blowing, but it's fascinating stuff. And, it doesn't change what we need to do day to day. We just keep obeying, but
Right.
It's pretty fascinating. I don't know if anybody is familiar with some of the writing of Frank Peretti. Have you ever
Yes.
heard of This Present Darkness and
Right.
Piercing? Have you read those books?
I have. I'm actually a writer myself. I've met Ted Decker in person.
Did you? Wow.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so what did you think of Peretti's books?
Terrifying, honestly.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, in like the best thriller kind of way, but believable.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, and I've talked to through the years a lot of people who have read those books, and they always ask the same question, and that is it possible that Peretti is accurate in the way this really works? And I don't have a good reason to say no, it's not, and here's why. It seems to me that it could very well be the way it works.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's just really cool because I've always had that thought. Nobody has ever said anything like that before, but
No.
I don't think I would be important enough for Satan to come and, be right next to me, but he would influence the people who influence me, who.
Yeah, I've thought that many times that Satan has probably never personally tempted me, but he's got workers that have, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is very cool. I've enjoyed this so much. It's been a wonderful study.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed. I've sure enjoyed it. I love teaching the book of Daniel, and every time I study it, it's like, boy, it raises more questions.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of the elders' wives too, and we love DeAndre. You all did such a good job with him.
Thank you.
I'm sure you know.
Yeah, we're proud of him. He's such a good guy. So that's good to hear, though.
Well, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful night.
All right, you too, and
all right,
goodbye to the others that are on here too.
All right, bye-bye.
Right.